You're listening to a mini episode of the Practical Permaculture podcast with Joe and Elise. Hey guys, it's Joe here this week, and this topic is about homesteading and really debunking the myth that do we need a lot of land to be a homesteader? So I thought I'd start with a little bit about, well, what is homesteading? And look, the general idea of homesteading is to produce as much of your own food as you can in a sustainable, let me get that word out, sustainable and ideally regenerative way. And look, definitely environmentally conscious. And you want to be doing that as much as possible within your context. So generally homesteading is about being self-sufficient in as much as you can, or as much as you choose to be, I suppose you could say. Now, what are the different activities of a general homesteader? Well, they can range from anything really, from growing produce, preserving food, making homemade items, raising animals for meat and for eggs, for pest management or manure. So there's a lot of different things that you can do under that sort of banner, I suppose, of homesteading. Now, homesteading can also include sourcing local items, so things that you can't or you don't want to produce, and really swapping with others. And we have touched on this in other episodes. So think about for example, your neighbor makes like the best soap in town. So maybe they've got goats and they're making goat milk soap and they're putting lots of, aromatics in there and herbs and all sorts of really good stuff. And maybe they also make herbal medicines because they're really, into their herbs. And that's not really your jam, right? So that's not really what you do, but you make an absolute cracker passata and you've got an abundance of canned passata. And you also have a great strawberry patch. So you make strawberry preserves every year. So you guys get together and you choose to swap and you come up with a suitable amount that's a fair, what you believe to be a fair swap. So no money exchanges hands. You're just doing a straight swap. So that can also come under the homesteading banner as well. So it doesn't have to be about everything that you're producing. But it's not just about food, right? Like it can be making your own products too. So things like clothing, like personal care, like we talked about soap, that could be soaps, it could be creams, body lotions, it could be hair care products, face care products, all sorts of different things. It could be cleaning products, things like your dishwashing soap or your laundry detergent. It could be surface sprays, things like that. It could be that you make your own furniture. You've got access to, products or, timbers, things like that. And you have the skills to be able to make your own furniture. Candles. Candles is another one that people make. And that can be something that's quite easy. I've never made candles. I don't know how easy it is. Those of you that do probably sitting there thinking, no, Joe, they're not that easy to make. I really don't know. But things like that, candles, cards, art, upcycling wares and things like that, things that you pick up, that can all come under the homesteading banner as well. So you don't need a lot of land, right, to be doing those sorts of activities. But as the episode is about, do you need land to homestead? Let's go back outside. So depending on what you want to do on your homestead, that's going to dictate to you how much land you need and, land that you need, but also maybe access to. So you don't necessarily own it, but also the consideration is where you want that land to be. So for example, if you want fresh cow's milk, an urban backyard just isn't going to cut it, right? Your neighbour's going to be looking over there going, oh, what the hell's Bessie doing over there? So you need access to enough pasture to support a house cow, as well as being able to have easy access to that cow at least a few times a day. You got to think, well, you're going to be milking the cow, you need to be feeding her, and you also need to be attending to her and her calf because milk doesn't get produced unless a cow becomes pregnant and has a calf, because that's why the milk is produced for the baby. So you've got those considerations as well. But like, let's say if you choose goats for milk, then maybe you don't need as much room, but you're definitely going to need a super secure fence. And again, enough food for them to pick at all day long. Now, another consideration is local zoning, local government zoning. So whether you're residential, you're rural, or about 1,000 other different zones that are out there. But most urban or residential areas will allow, say, a few hens with certain conditions. It might be you can have up to 3 hens, but they have to be so far away from a fence and not at the front of the property, things like that. But what that means is that you can't have any roosters. So generally, that means that raising chickens for meat may not be viable for you, but sticking to eggs is something that's viable for you. So again, looking at what your context is. Other considerations is that you want to have is the room that you have access to for storage. So a lot about homesteading is about either producing your own or being able to store your own. And so, like, if you're planning on preserving food, then you're going to need to store it somewhere. If it's canned in a jar, then you really need shelf space, or at least space in a cool, dry place that's relatively temperature stable. And look, that could be in a cupboard, in the house, or in the laundry, or even under your bed. So I've definitely heard of people storing their canned goods under the bed because it's actually relatively temperature stable, depending on where your bedroom is in the house, of course. And look, for me, I put mine in the pantry. I put them in a spare cupboard, in a cupboard in a spare room. But sometimes I run out of space, so I've put them in random spaces, like in the hutch, because I had a couple of spots. I'm like, yeah, I'll actually use those in the next 3 months, and I know they won't get hot. But then I forget where I put them, and then I go looking for something else, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know there was a jar of pickles there, or oh, that's right, I made this jam. So it's actually a really nice surprise, and it's like, oh, I get this little present. Not ideal though. You want to know where you store your goods, and also you want to make sure that you label them. Don't want to get too much into the details there, but you definitely want to be labeling them. Now, if you're going to be freezing your food, then you need to consider your freezer space and the reliability of your electricity supply. The last thing you want is to go to all this effort to fill up several freezers, whether that's of meat or veggies or cooked meals or whatever you've got going on there, for the power to go out and you not be there and you lose all of that. Like that's devastating. And it's not just devastating to you, it's such a waste of food all up. So you just really want to consider what are your backup methods, especially if you're off grid. A lot of homesteaders are off grid. So if you are off grid or you're considering going off grid, then make sure you've got a backup source and maybe even a backup to your backup source, and don't necessarily use one energy supply for all of the freezers. So just consider that if you can, you've got multiple sources. So once again, context is key. Like we always mention context because that's the thing that drives it. So what do you have access to and what do you want to do? That's what's going to really determine if you have enough land for your homestead vision of what you want to achieve. So one thing I really want to emphasize though is it's about what you have access to, not necessarily what you own or you grow or you produce. So you might not have enough room to be producing a whole heap of food, but you've got access to, say, organic markets, farmers markets, maybe on a monthly basis. Maybe it's only a few times a year that you get a chance to go to the markets, but you can be strategic in when you go and you can buy bulk of the items that you want and then have a big, weekend or a week of preserving all of those items. Or the other option is maybe you can actually go foraging for food locally. There's lots of different groups out there that if you've not gone and foraged for wild foods before, and you might be a bit nervous about it, you can go and connect with them. But I'd definitely say join some homesteading groups. So we interviewed Amanda from Rockpile. I'm going to get this wrong. Rockpile Homestead. I'm going to put the link. I can't think of the top of my head what the Facebook group is. It's an amazing group though, and if you've listened to that episode, you'll understand why. Because Amanda is an absolute powerhouse, and there is no bullshit that is allowed in that group. It is all just really good discussion about homesteading. So look, the rub is you don't need a lot of land to be a homesteader, just enough for what you want to achieve. So thank you for having me in your ears today, and I would love to see all the homesteady things that you've been doing. So if you jump into the Practical Permaculture Community Facebook group or on Instagram and tag us, I'll put all the details down in the show notes below. Bye.